me to clean my room.
Shalom, everybody, and welcome to Mishpachah. My name is Debbie Good, and Mishpachah is the Hebrew word for family. I have with me two members of my family, and we're going to be discussing some unusual things. But with me today is Paula and David. Now, over the past several weeks, we've been talking about several things you can do at home to bring the Bible or the festivals, even Torah, alive into your home and to make things come to life and to breathe some new fire and zeal into the things that you'd like to see out of the Bible. Today we have a little bit more serious topic. Very soon after Passover is over and all the dishes are changed out, you're back to eating leaven and we're still in the springtime, but very soon after that, we observe a day that is not mentioned in the Bible. It is still a very serious day and should be respected by everyone that we come into contact with, and that would be Yom haShoah. Yom haShoah is the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And as I mentioned, it's not listed in the Bible as a festival, but it is a very serious topic that we need to cover. It's very difficult to discuss this with children, to remember things that had happened in the Holocaust. There were over 12 million people who lost their lives due to this tragic, horrific event. And that's just the Holocaust that took place in the 1940s, or late 1930s and in the 1940s. Of these people, over 6 million of the people who lost their lives were Jews. Over 1 million were children. It was not only the Jewish people who suffered during the Holocaust, however. It was a number of other people, gypsies, the righteous Gentiles, people who were Christian but very sympathetic to the Jewish people and maybe tried to help them. There were people who did not go along with the Nazi cause. There were various groups of people who suffered, many Russians also. So we need to remember the day and keep it alive. You know, one of the most important sayings I've heard over the years is that he who does not remember history is doomed to repeat it. And one of the primary mottos of Holocaust Remembrance Day is, lest we forget. It's very important for us to bring this information to our children, because history could actually repeat itself. It's taken place over the years from one generation to another. Just very recently, several months, a year or two ago, we had an event that took place very close to where we live. It became a worldwide event happening in the city of Jasper, which is about an hour away from where we live. A horrific crime took place in which 3 young men took a black man and drug him behind their truck, killing him after much torture. The event and the trial gained worldwide attention. I believe even Dennis Rodman entered into the event by paying for the funeral of the man who lost his life. But this obviously was a crime of hate. It wasn't related to passion over feelings or domestic struggle. It wasn't for worldly gain. It was not related to a theft. It was simply done for hate over an individual because of who he was. And usually these crimes take place because either the Jewish people, in many cases black people, or other races are different. And the difference does not really seem enough in our eyes to take someone's life, but that's usually the main reason why somebody loses their life in such a tragic event. Well, as I mentioned, I have 2 people with me today. One is Paula. Paula is a college student, and unrelated to Yom HaShoah, she has been taking a photography course. Paula, would you like to share a little bit about your photography course and what you do there?
I'm in advanced photography. We develop our own film. We do black and white prints, and we have a number of assignments. And one of our assignments for midterms this semester was on you had to do a picture that was either metaphorical, allegorical, or symbolic. So that's
well, now this is very confusing to me because metaphorical, what was the other one?
Allegorical
or symbolic. That almost seems synonymous. I mean,
right.
Okay, but you could have chosen any particular subject as long as it met that criteria. Is that correct?
Right. We had one lady who did the metaphor, the eyes are the windows to the soul. We had somebody who did one about how the girl wears the pants in the relationship. There were some very wide topics going on.
Okay, well, what topic did you choose?
I wanted to do something about the Holocaust, a Holocaust memorial type picture, something symbolic. I had been to see a local production of Diary of Anne Frank, and their lobby display reminded me of some of the things that they have set up at Yad Vashem. And
Yad Vashem, by the way, is a very, very important museum as a memorial to victims of the Holocaust that's located in Jerusalem.
Right.
It's probably the most famous. By the way, there are many other Holocaust memorial museums all over the United States.
Right.
But this one is most well known, I would say, because of not just depicting pictorially what had occurred, the events that led to the Holocaust of the 1930s and 40s, but also the fact that it is a memorial to the victims of the Holocaust.
Right, and the people who helped them.
So this was an inspiration to you then?
Right.
As far as, okay, so why don't you tell us about your project? What did you finally come up with? And tell us how the wheels of your mind were turning to try to bring to the printed page or to try to bring to paper visually something that would depict some feeling over this.
Okay, this is the print that this isn't the one that I actually turned in, but it was just like it. I have 6 candles. The 6 candles represent the 6 million Jews who died. There's a memorial near the Western Wall, I think, where they have 6 candles burning all the time. I think so. So I had the 6 candles. I wanted to use actual barbed wire, but in where I live, you can't get just a little bit of barbed wire. You have to get a whole roll of it, and that seemed kind of silly. So I ended up cutting some branches from the bush in our front yard that has some thorns on it, just
like these?
Yeah, just like this.
These have some real long thorns on them.
Yeah. And so I set up the candles. I had a black background, and I speared this.
But you used a natural product basically to depict the barbed wire of the concentration camps.
And I actually ended up liking this more. It's sort of, to me, it reminded me of the Akedah and the binding of Isaac.
Yeah, most people might not understand when you say the Akedah, and you mentioned the binding of Isaac. What were you thinking of there?
It's the part, it's Genesis 22.
Oh, she's good, isn't she?
Okay,
your father would be so proud.
It's Genesis 22, and it's when Abraham is commanded to sacrifice Isaac, and they end up finding a ram caught in the thorns in the thicket.
And of course, the most important thing that is said is that God will Himself provide the sacrifice, and the sacrifice is found in the thorny briar or whatever of the.
Plus, thorns are reminiscent of crucifixion, and this is definitely a mass murder type of incident.
Okay.
So, and then we ended up, I just used the necklace that Dad had got me one year, the Star of David, and we sort of wrapped it,
entangled in
the thorns.
Oh, that's very metaphorical.
Right.
Right. Well, let me ask you, do you know yet what your professor has thought about the project?
I'm graded more on the composition and the artistry of it, so I think he liked it, but I don't think that this is the most effective image. There were a lot of things I would have liked to have done to it.
Well, for example, what would you have done to change
it? I might would have tried a lighter background, maybe with a map or something. I thought about distressing the print, making it look old, beating it up, like it had gone through some sort of tragedy itself, but ended up just
Well, you
turning
mentioned
this
the
in.
candles, and you had, in your picture, you have 6 candles reminiscent of the 6 million Jews. That's one thing that we normally associate with Yom HaShoah is candles. We just happen to bring a few here, but we want to point out that candles are used in connection with Yom HaShoah, not necessarily as a prayer to or a prayer for someone who has passed away, but is to be used as a memorial. I like to think of it this way. There were lights, the lights of life, that were extinguished during the Holocaust, and we do not want those lights to go out forever. in the children's memorial
Right.
at
That's what I
Yad
was thinking
Vashem. Very, very profound. You walk in, they use only 6 candles and a series of prisms and mirrors to look like, it looks like you're standing in the middle of a starry universe. Because each child, every single child, a living being, had a soul. And we want that light to continue. You know, I've heard people say that it's very tragic. Who knows if another Einstein, Beethoven,
Right.
someone who had such gifts, such talents to offer to the entire world, who might have been lost because of the tragic loss of life during that time. You know, I can thank our public school system for one thing. It's not very often I can say that, however, but at least in the state of Texas, it is now required reading for certain books to be read. And David, you've been through, and I know in 8th grade you have a book that you're supposed to read. Can you tell what you were supposed to read in the 8th grade?
In the 8th grade, we read the Diary of Anne Frank.
Diary of Anne Frank. And it was very moving to you also, wasn't it? I
Yep.
remember you bringing it home and talking to us about it. For those people who might not know, although it's hard for me to imagine anybody at this point not knowing, but Anne Frank was a young Jewish girl hiding in a secret annex in Holland. She and another family and then another gentleman were all very secretive, having to keep very quiet during the day lest they be found out. And then toward the end of her diary, you know, she jots down daily or every several days different events and different feelings she's going through. The family is found out and arrested and taken to concentration camps. Every member of the group lost their lives in the concentration camp with the exception of her father, Otto. When he came back to I might add also that I think at least two gentlemen who helped in the hiding of Anne Frank and her family were sent to concentration camps as well. It wasn't just Jewish people who were sent to concentration camps, but as I mentioned earlier, the righteous Gentiles, people who were Christian who helped. Of the group, these two businessmen, the friends of Otto Frank, did come back, and I'm not too sure about that one, but Otto Frank came back to the place where he worked, visited what they refer to as the secret annex or the attic, and upon returning found lying on the floor just in a big mess after the raid, the diary. And later he had this diary published. Many people might not realize, I saw a movie several years ago, a very good movie called, I believe it's called The Attic, but starring Mary Steenburgen. This is the same story. It's the Anne Frank story as told through the eyes of Miep Gies. Miep is the young woman who visits them, and that she takes a real liking to Anne, and it talks about her struggles on living on the outside, trying to ration, get food, trying to secretly take care of this family and being worried about them the entire time they're there. And so it's just an added dimension to the story. And I might add that the reason Miep Gies wrote this particular book is because there seemed to be a real fervor that rose up several years ago by a group of people saying the Holocaust never took place. There really was no Anne Frank. The whole thing was a hoax and never happened. Of course, we know that's not true, but Miep decided, you know, that she was going to do in her own way something to show that it did and tell her side of the story. And of course, we all know the story of Corrie ten Boom, but the lady who lived in Holland who hid Jews in her home and was herself taken to a concentration camp. Now, David, when you were reading the Diary of Anne Frank, your teacher, I remember, had a very unusual project for your classroom.
Yeah.
What did y'all have to do? You remember?
Everybody in the classroom built up a family tree. Mm-hmm. And everybody knew in the classroom I was Jewish at the time. So she wanted to treat us like Jewish people were treated.
What was her way of allowing all of you to experience the feelings of the Holocaust?
Just, we had to wear a Star David, let's put it that way. And if you lose it, you get points taken off for a test grade.
I'll be honest with you, I applauded the teacher for this particular assignment. I thought it was very good to make some students feel in very, very, very small, tiny measure, what it must have been like to live under those circumstances. Now, David, you, however, refused to wear the Star of David, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Now, you have necklaces that have a Star of David on them. It's not that you're against the Star of David, but you refuse. And you want to tell us why you refuse to do this?
Well, one of the big things was even the other students were curious, saying, you really want to put up with this? So I said,
well, the fact that you have a Jewish background.
And I just said, no, I'm not going to
Well,
do it.
I remember I told you at the time, I said, I think it's a good assignment. I'm glad to see the teacher doing something like this. But if you have a problem with wearing that Star of David because of your Jewish background, I believe I could go to the principal and plead your case and back you up on it. Okay? Because one of the things we do not want to do is to put the Jewish people under persecution again. You know, that's one thing we're not trying to convey. And where I applaud the teacher, as I said, for having an assignment like this so that people could, in very small measure, experience a feeling of it. We certainly do not want to place Jews in that trouble again, into that distress again. You know, when I was shopping one day for Myron, Myron is now 12 years old, but several years ago, he was having a reading problem. And I was doing almost anything I could to try to find something for him to read. And we visited the local bookstore and, you know, to get something else. And while we were there, we came across this book I want to show to you. Of course, the first thing that appealed to me is that it is written by Kirk Douglas. And so I looked at the back cover, and sure enough, it is the very same Kirk Douglas, the very famous movie actor. Now, Joe and I are both old enough to remember Kirk Douglas and some of the wonderful movies he's done. Well, what's odd is that some of the children at this point think of Kirk Douglas as the father of Michael Douglas, which says a lot for Michael Douglas. In other words, he's kind of proven himself in his own right. But many of us remember some of the movies that Kirk Douglas has brought out. Let me read to you just a little bit of what it says on the back. The name of the book is The Broken Mirror. And it says, with the broken mirror, the ragman's son, and by the way, that is sort of a little nickname for Kirk Douglas. The ragman's son has added another accomplishment to his film and book career. It is absorbing and touching, a book to be read and enjoyed by youngsters and their parents alike. It grips your attention and has so much to say, in such a concise manner it should not be limited to Jewish readers. And by the way, the person who made that comment, that review came from Steven Spielberg. I'm looking at the book. It's the story of a little boy in the 1930s named Moshe. And his sister tells him a story about a broken mirror. Later on, his family is taken to Nazi prisons or concentration camps. And it turns out that he is the sole survivor. And he basically loses his faith through all of this. He goes to live in an orphanage, and the one friend he comes into contact with that he befriends is basically taken away from him. He suffers one loss after another. And let me just read this little part to you. In this moving story of a young boy's flight from his past, legendary actor and acclaimed author Kirk Douglas reminds us that sometimes we must embrace our most painful memories to uncover a brighter future. He tells a timeless tale of loss, of faith, and its recovery. So it is an uplifting book, but this is one that I would recommend to parents of younger children that are, say, late elementary to early junior high school age. There are a number of films and books that have been written. You mentioned, David, the Diary of Anne Frank. You are actually now, as a sophomore in high school, studying another work in literature, aren't you?
Yep. Night by Elie Wiesel.
The name of the work is Night?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the author again?
Elie Wiesel.
Okay, and who is he?
He a survivor of the Holocaust. He's written many works, and he's probably one of the most famous
authors, at least of this generation.
Yep.
Right. He's a very, very famous writer, and he does often mention the Holocaust in a lot of his writings. Tell me, what kind of comments or things are coming out of your classroom from reading this book? Have y'all had occasion to have any discussion over it yet? Or?
Well, when we first read it, nobody likes to read.
Okay,
school.
Typical high school thing then.
Nobody likes to, but everybody enjoyed the book. They said it was real moving and touching, and a lot of them were shocked when they read this stuff. I knew everything that happened by then, so I didn't have any problem with reading that stuff. Some of them asked me if it was a hard time, but it's no big deal, but a lot of them were shocked. And even the teacher said that the book we were reading was a very shortened version of the original.
Which is approximately
700 pages.
Yeah,
So,
we are now in contact with Scott Lapka, our friend in Montana, who's going to try to locate the original book. We don't know if it can be found, but we're trying to make some effort to find out about the original work. Okay, and David, have there been any things that have come up at school that you can think of dealing with anti-Semitism or the Holocaust or events that have taken place?
not really.
We don't really
Well,
see too much of it where we live. I know that there are things that have come up from time to time in my father's life. Occasionally, you kids will come home telling about how Jews are not liked. There was one point, this was always my favorite story. I'm going to ask you to repeat it. This happened about 3 or 4 years ago, I think, in a little incident at school where somebody called you a name. And what did they call you?
Oh, they just said Jew, I think is what they said.
Very
I was taking a test at the time,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't hear it. The teacher did, and she popped both of us out there, and everybody was saying I didn't do anything. And I was still in that mood, and then I found out what he said. It really didn't bother me, but he got in trouble.
He got in trouble bad with his father, didn't he? Or
I'm not sure if he did with his father. I know he did.
well, the story I'm thinking of is a young man, a boy, who called your name, and he went home and mentioned it to his father and came back to you and apologized the next day.
That was another incident.
Another incident. See, there are several of these little incidents that come up from time to time. But
He was jumping around saying stuff, and then he talked to his dad about it, and his dad said, "You shouldn't do that," because
he made the boy apologize,
yeah,
didn't
he did, and he was even sorry. He didn't realize. I mean, he was told
he?
probably
But do you remember what his father told him?
I can't remember.
I remember what you told me. It's been many years, but I remember
Okay.
the father telling the young man, "Don't ever say anything like that again. Don't ever say anything bad about the Jewish people because Jesus was a
That's
Jew
right.
himself. And you don't know, but that this boy, meaning you,
Mm-hmm.
David, might turn out to be somebody real important." Well, we can only hope, can't we? Okay, as I said, it's very difficult to convey the message of the Holocaust and telling your children or observing in some measure, learning about the Holocaust or the persecutions that have taken place over the years. There's one thing that is almost always universally done in many groups across the country and in Israel. Whenever there's a Holocaust memorial museum or some place of note, almost always they're going to do something in particular. There's a song that is almost always associated with this particular day. And by the way, I have with me here the kids' catalog of Jewish holidays. There are several of these little books. We know we have the Jewish Kids Catalog. There's a Jewish Kids Festival Catalog, and this is the one specifically on Jewish holidays. All of these books are offered by the Jewish Publication Society and can be purchased from some of the people that we get a lot of our books from, such as Scott Lapka or, various others. It has a nice little section on Yom haShoah, or Holocaust Remembrance Day, but there is a song, as I mentioned, that is most often used with this particular subject. The song is called Ani Ma'amim. And I will not read all of the Hebrew to you, but it does have the tune written out for it. But I want to read you the translation, which to me is just incredibly moving. This is always read, "I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, and although he may tarry, I will wait daily for his coming." See, to me it is just incredibly profound that people could live through a terrible experience or know people who have lived through the experience of the Holocaust and still have faith in waiting for the Messiah.
That's the 12th attribute of faith, isn't it?
I believe you're right. Now, also, you can find that particular song in other books. For example, I have one here called the Hebrew Songs for All Seasons. And this, by the way, can be purchased through a publication house that carries most of the sheet music we purchase, Terra Publications. And we will be talking about music publications in some of our later episodes. Anyway, as I said, it's very difficult sometimes to convey the problems, the meanings of such a tragic, horrible event. What's even more difficult is that many people refuse to accept that these events took place. Even more trying is the fact that we know people who have lived through the event, but at this point in time, this being, we're now in the 21st century, many of the survivors are beginning to die. And not through means of the Holocaust, but just because of their age. We're losing more and more survivors daily. There might be some things that people can do to remember this particular event. For example, you can usually contact somebody through one of the Holocaust Memorial Museums, and most of the time they will have a list of survivors of the Holocaust who would be very glad to come out and give a lecture or to speak to groups for Sunday school classes, for Bible study meetings, even for a family gathering. Many times the survivors have made it a point to continue to speak out against these events so that people would not forget. Even recently we read an article in the newspaper about a young Jewish man who's an American getting his, I believe, master's degree at Berkeley University. While on campus, he heard the chanting of many people, many Arabs out there talking about the great event of the car bombings in Jerusalem or in Israel, and death to the Jews, and it's still continuing today. And based on that, because he lived through that experience he lived through the experience on his campus, he had visited Israel several times. But after seeing on his own American campus how people were reacting to the Holocaust, he made it a point of going to Israel, as we all should try to do in the future. Shalom, and thank you for joining us today on our program.